Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the one and only time, except during voir dire, that I get to speak to you during this trial. It's been a long trial, and I will just echo what Ms. Manning said about your dedication and your attention to this case over what has been, at least in recent years, one of the longer trials that has taken place in the state of Connecticut. I am going to refer to notes while I'm talking to you. Usually I just try to talk and I have pointers, but because there are so many things that happen in this case, there's just been so much over the course of the last six and a half weeks, I may refer more to the notes than I normally would, and I apologize in advance if it looks like I'm reading from a paper rather than just talking to you. What I want to start off by pointing out is that what really happened on May 24th, 2019, because whatever was going on that day, whatever Fotis Doulos' role was in the disappearance, and I'll say the likely death of Jennifer Doulos, Michelle Troconis did not know. She did not know that Fotis Doulos planned to harm her. Everything suggested that things were going well, and it was to the contrary. In fact, she didn't know that Fotis was capable of doing something like this. A man who was dedicated to his 5 children, had been in court for years trying to get custody back. The state has made what I would suggest are unfounded and unfair assumptions and has speculated that Michelle Troconis had to know what was going on, that she was, because she was romantically linked with Fotis, that she was somehow involved in this nefarious, murderous plot. But that's not reality. That's more like one of these cable TV movies, scripted movies. It's not based on the facts that you heard during this trial. It is, and I will say this multiple times, speculation. It's conjecture. It's guesswork, which is not the standard of evidence in a criminal case here. We also concede that something bad did in fact happen at 69 Wells Lane in New Canaan that morning. It's clear, and we will also concede that Fotis Doulos is ultimately responsible for what happened to Jennifer Doulos, whether he did it himself or he had a compatriot who was involved in it down there, because we know someone else was down at 16, or at least down in New Canaan that day, and we know that wasn't Michelle Troconis. The state has not proven where Fotis Doulos was that morning. There are some suggestions. We see the vehicles driving. There is a tiny amount, I emphasize a tiny amount of DNA found on a faucet inside the home, which I'll talk about in a minute. But whether or not Fotis was in Farmington, whether it is in New Canaan or somewhere in between, it is conjecture as to where he actually was and what he personally did with his own hands. Now, we're looking at evidence that's been going on for 5 years, collection of evidence, and taking statements as recently as last month from Mr. Gumieni, new statements from Mr. Gumieni. But there's been forensics, there was surveillance cameras, there were multiple interviews, there were family court pleadings, there were the interrogations. You heard 8-9 hours of interrogations of Michelle Troconis. Even in hindsight, even now, major questions remain about what happened. It's still unclear. It's still unclear what happened. And unfortunately, this trial will not solve that puzzle. It will remain a mystery, an unfinished puzzle. But again, this is not Fotis Doulos' trial. This is Michelle Troconis' trial. And because it's Michelle Troconis' trial, you must find beyond a reasonable doubt that Michelle conspired with Fotis Doulos, not just to cause harm to Jennifer Doulos, but to murder her. That was the plot, that was the intent of Michelle Troconis on or before May 24th, 2019. Then you have to find beyond a reasonable doubt various elements that Michelle was part of a plot to get rid of evidence, some microscopic, some in opaque garbage bags, but that she knew what was in it, knew its purpose, and what she did was the same exact intent as whatever Fotis Doulos had planned. But again, part of what you have to prove here, and what the state has to prove, what you have to find, is that Fotis Doulos murdered his wife. The criminal information, which you will have, states specifically that Fotis Doulos assaulted his wife and restrained her and intended to kill her. Again, there's no evidence of that. It's speculation as to who actually did that, as to any of that, for that matter. No matter how you view this evidence, even in hindsight, 5 years later, there is nothing to suggest that Michelle had any clue about what was going to happen in New Canaan on May 24th, 2019. More importantly, there's nothing to suggest that Michelle would even think that Fotis was capable of doing anything like that. Again, Michelle simply did not know. Now, we can talk about what Michelle did know about Fotis Doulos. We can talk about his life before June 2nd, 2019, when Michelle was, after her arrest and being brought before the police and being interrogated for that first time. This is the Fotis Doulos that Michelle had met down in Miami. It was very different than the one that the police were describing to him and what the police had learned from Jennifer's family and what they knew about Fotis Doulos. Michelle met Fotis in 2016 at the Miami Water Skiing Club. Both were members, both were competitive water skiers. They both had children about the same age, and the children became friends. You heard from Lauren Almeida about that. Fotis introduced the babysitter. He introduced his children. And at some point, Michelle fell in love with that man. He was an outgoing, fun-loving father, successful businessman with a high-end construction of homes business, a competitive athlete with similar interests to her. Obviously more similar interests than has been testified to that Jennifer Doulos had with Fotis. But she was also told, and you heard this from many people, that they were working towards an amicable, friendly divorce, that everything was going to be fine, there was going to be legal separation and an amicable divorce and custody. In September of 2017, Michelle did move to Connecticut with her young daughter. She enrolled her daughter in local schools, made her own friends, engaged in her passion for water skiing. She traveled. She helped work on her daughter's athletic interests and her sports training. But more importantly, she also had her own business. You heard from several people she had an import rug business that she was selling in local Farmington Valley stores and to individuals. But Fotis always showed the side of him that he wanted her and others to see. He hid things from Michelle just like he did from his friends and from his employees, including Pavel Gumieni. He did that for years. Even Lauren Almeida, who used to work for him, who considered him a mentor, didn't believe it when Jennifer suggested her that Fotis was having an affair. He was good at hiding what he was really up to. Now, in 2019, and we just heard that from the prosecution, there were some strains in the relationship between Fotis and Michelle. Just like Fotis, you heard, was lying to her, he was storing other women's phone numbers in his phone. He'd put some of those names in the Greek language, which she didn't understand. And she was upset, thinking that he was communicating with other women, but using men's names to hide that fact. They were written in Greek, and Michelle didn't know any Greek. She had already talked about moving to Colorado with her daughter after the end of the school year. And it also looked like at the end of April, the custody fight was about to end. There was a favorable report Everyone said that report was favorable to Fotis Doulos and that he was going to look forward to spending the whole summer with his children. That was discussed not just with the lawyers who talked to Michelle, but it was also discussed with his friends and those that knew him well. They were, quote, moving in a positive direction, unquote, starting at the end of April. And according to Michelle's interviews with the police, she also thought everything seemed good by May. Everything was consistent with the testimony by friends, his co-workers, his employees and former employees, and especially the lawyers that you heard from, Mr. Meehan and Mr. Rose. This nefarious plot under those circumstances makes no sense. Why then? Why at that moment is he going to then plot with his girlfriend to kill Jennifer? Even in hindsight, that doesn't make sense to any of the people that you heard from. None of them. Let's talk a little bit about Pavel Gumieni. His name came up very briefly in the state's argument. Mr. Gumieni saw Fotis every day practically during the week for years, for a decade even before he worked for him. He came into that business, worked with him, talked to him, knew and liked Jennifer Doulos, helped her move down to Fairfield County without Fotis knowing it. He didn't want to upset Fotis, so he was actually helping Jennifer move her belongings out of the house without tipping off Fotis that she was doing that. But what else do we know about Pavel? Even after Fotis Doulos was seen or believed to be cleaning his Tacoma, he had told Michelle that Pavel intended to sell it, and he told Pavel to find a replacement for it. He also told him to replace the car seats in that Tacoma. Remember, Pavel Gumieni was combing junkyards up in the between Waterbury and Hartford, looking for new seats. Fotis told him to call seats, if he called him on the phone, hardware. What is this, some kind of spy code? Why would Fotis tell Mr. Gumieni to not refer to it as seats, but hardware? Who would be present at that point? Michelle or perhaps other employees? He didn't want them to know. Then you saw the picture. He took the Porsche seats, took them out of the Porsche, put them in his vehicle, but in such a haphazard way. You saw that picture. They're being propped up with a bucket. He's driving now his Tacoma with a bucket holding a sports car seat in his pickup truck. Despite all these red flags, doing all these things, after Fotis told him he wants them to do this because there may be some of DNA of Jennifer in his vehicle, he does it anyway. Even with full immunity from prosecution, which the judge will talk to you about, he still insisted to you in questioning that he did not believe that Fotis would harm Jennifer. Even after, as long as a reasonable explanation was given to him as to why he should do these things, he believed that. And he went along with it. He knew more than Michelle did, and he still did his bidding. There are those people that came to the house the night before, May 23rd, 2019. You have Stephan and Beth Wright. You have Hutch Haynes. All of them talked about what a wonderful evening, happy evening it was. They talked about there was no bad-mouthing of Jennifer at all. If you remember, Beth Wright, who is a domestic violence counselor, that's part of her job. It's one of her jobs. Went so far as to say that everything seemed to make sense. Everything was working out. They basically toasted the happy outcome, that it was going to end very soon in a happy way. Hutch Haynes, who had known Fotis for years, didn't think he could do anything like this. You heard that from him. That was even during the investigation, even after the police came and they had divers going through his water skiing pond. I already talked about what the babysitter, Miss Almeida, said. She thought Michelle was nice. And there were also, even through her, no prior examples or incidents of violence. There was a discussion about him wanting her to sign a piece of paper, yelling at her, but there was never any violence in that relationship. The professionals, Attorney Meehan, the guardian ad litem, the social worker, Sidney Streeter, they both were involved. Meehan was involved for years. He also said everything seemed to be working out. It was a favorable report. And Ms. Streeter, a professional whose job it was to keep an eye on Fotis, described how amicable and friendly that was on the Wednesday, I guess, naming day for one of the daughters, where they were talking together, they were being civil. He gave her a chocolate bunny, and she took it from him and ate it. He handed her a cake. She took that and brought it into the house. She invited him to come out and sit out on the picnic table and have dinner with the children since the park closed earlier. You heard Attorney Mike Rose, the divorce lawyer for Fotis Dulos, say that Fotis didn't want to talk about the divorce case in front of Michelle. Said, please call me later. I'm sorry I can't talk while Michelle is around. But he's the one who said there was now light at the end of the tunnel. Everything was going to be fine. Things were looking good. Why at that moment would Michelle agree to risk her life, risk her daughter's entire family life to at that point say, I think we now want to get rid of Jennifer Dulos? It doesn't make sense. It's pure speculation. You heard a little bit about Anna Curry during the questioning of Mr. Kimball. You remember Anna Curry was the woman who moved in with Fotis Dulos right after she had moved out and had been arrested. Her picture was shown to Michelle, and you remember, I can't remember if it was Clabby or Kimball referred to her as Michelle 2.0. Remember that? That was a woman who had moved in with this man within a month or so of him being accused of destroying evidence on Albany Avenue with bloody shirt and a bloody bra connected to Jennifer Dulos at that point. Then you remember from Petu Duperon. Clara, she was a friend of both Michelle and Fotis, had been to the house many, many times. She never suspected that Fotis would harm Jennifer, not even after June 1st, 2019, when she never spoke to him again. She did speak to Michelle. She continues to speak to Michelle. She's here in the courtroom even today. Let me just talk in general about something that I think that maybe we can all agree on. The people that we trust and believe in are our friends and loved ones. And people usually are who they say they are. We don't immediately go and distrust them, even when certain red flags arise. Even if you think they're doing something, I wonder why he's doing that. You don't suddenly think this is a bad person. Our default in our human interrelations is to believe people. We all do that. We also never think that we're going to be manipulated by someone we care about. This could never happen to us. But with the benefit of hindsight, we can't even believe that we were fooled and tricked in that way. I believe I asked most of you during voir dire if you think that you need to share everything that you're thinking and doing with your significant other or spouse. All of you at least acknowledge that they should do that, but I also recall saying that you don't believe that they always do. But that doesn't mean we stop caring about that person. It doesn't mean we immediately decide they're what? About to murder somebody? That's not how we think. We also know that Fotis Dulos committed suicide in 2020. You have that death certificate in evidence. You can see he died from the complications of acute carbon monoxide intoxication. It specifically says intentional inhalation of motor vehicle exhaust inside a garage, and you'll see the yellow box, suicide is checked. Whatever Fotis Doulos did, it was not for or because of Michelle, and it was not with her. Fotis put up a facade until his last poisoned breath, and he died without ever acknowledging his actions or admitting his role even to his own children. He never gave answers, and he can't be held to answer. Everyone wants closure. Michelle is not the remaining half of a scheming plot. She was never part of the equation. That is pure speculation. She didn't know. Most of this trial has been about Fotis Doulos in absentia. You heard about the fingerprints. You heard about the blood. You heard about the DNA. You also remember that the biologist Anna Valonis said that these KM tests, these so-called screening tests, they only suggest the possibility of human blood. It's a place for them to swab. And the suggestion by the prosecutor that, well, there's some DNA on the faucet, and we should assume that means that Fotis Doulos was in the house. Remember, it was a mixture between Jennifer Doulos' DNA and Fotis Doulos' DNA. It's the only place in the house. Why would his DNA be there other than she took chocolate from him, she took a cake from him, the children all had touched his hair, they were playing basketball with him, and where else would they wash their hands before dinner but on the faucet in the kitchen? So a small amount of DNA appeared there, and it just stays there. It doesn't go away. In the same way, you heard Mr. Gumieni admit that Jennifer Doulos had been in his truck before. You want to know how a tiny bit of DNA gets, remember, on the underside? Not on the seat, but on the underside? It's because someone had sat in that seat. It was not blood. Those were sponge rubber seats. The state is asking you to speculate that there is evidence where there is none, but the absence of evidence is not evidence. You can't infer facts in a vacuum. 0 times 0 equals 0, basic math. You wonder how much blood would have been there if only Fotis had not taken out a car mat that was never found in the Suburban. How much blood would have been in the Tacoma if it hadn't been brought to the car wash? How come there was nothing in the Cherokee that maybe Michelle was driving and not Mr. Gumieni? There was nothing in the Cherokee because there was nothing to find in the Cherokee. What might have been discovered at 80 Mountain Spring Road if Michelle and Fotis hadn't done a little cleanup for a showing that we have proven happened the next day of that house? Let's speculate. The state would have you speculate about a smoke coming out of a chimney in the fireplace in the house. Unfortunately, it's in black and white. The original is in color, but that's the best we could do for today. You were shown a couple of videos. 2 of them are within minutes of each other. Remember, that's a motion-activated camera. So to suggest there were just 2 times when there's smoke coming out of that chimney is unreasonable. It's unfair, and it's misleading in many ways. Police continue to investigate. They continue to assemble evidence. They went to Albany Avenue after learning that Mr. Doulos' phone had pinged on a cell tower on Albany Avenue, and they got the C4 cameras that showed him, not Michelle, putting garbage in black opaque bags in various receptacles. 3 receptacles, not 6, not 30. Now, the state is asking you to evaluate in hindsight that she must have known what was in those bags. They were on Albany Avenue. She had told her they were going to Starbucks, but they went past Starbucks. Now, I believe the maps show it's about 1.5 miles past where the Starbucks is. But he told her, well, I just have to get rid of a few bags here. She told the police that he had done that before. Contractors, think about it. When you build a spec house, you heard that from Mr. Wright. You build this house, you hope to sell it. it's not for a particular customer. But if you have to buy another dumpster, if you have to rent another dumpster, that comes right off the profit, comes right off the bottom line. So how many builders drive around and go to public locations and dump trash in receptacles that aren't their own? Especially since Friday morning, you already now know, was garbage pickup in that part of Farmington. But what do we know today that we didn't know then? We know that Jennifer Doulos missed her appointment with a Dr. Geronimus that morning. We know that she was supposed to be in New York, that her children and the babysitter had already gone to New York. The call came in at 7 p.m. to the New Canaan Police Department that Jennifer was missing. They went to the house, they noticed something that looked like blood, and that's when the investigation began. Teams of investigators from multiple agencies took part in this investigation. They went through every point and every part of the garage at 69 Wells Lane. They found obvious signs of violence, and they were working against the clock. Now at 8 p.m. approximately, they found the Suburban parked on the side of Waveney Park. It had not been seen since 10:30 in the morning. Where was it? You saw school bus videos from Lapham Road. You don't see any time when that Suburban is sitting there or parked there. Now, law enforcement learned about Fotis from Jennifer's friends, that he was manipulative, that he was volatile. He had a years-long custody battle going on. Michelle, yes, was in the Raptor when he dumped those garbage bags on Albany Avenue. And the police thought Michelle knew what was in them, but she didn't know. And there's no way you could see without X-ray vision what was in those bags. Incidentally, they found nothing at 80 Mountain Spring Road. There was a coffee cup that was noted in the recycling bin in the garage. The one thing that might have had evidentiary value, remember what Detective Sergeant Pearson said, they found nothing of evidentiary value. She noted the coffee cup, but she didn't take it. Would that not at least be consistent with what Michelle said? Fotis told her he dropped coffee, spilled coffee, and that's why he was cleaning up and he needed some paper towels. But see, that doesn't fit the prosecution's narrative, so they didn't even collect that as evidence. So Michelle was handcuffed. She was taken down to New Canaan, 80 miles away from where she was after she gets kicked out of her house. The police accused Fotis at that time of doing something that she thought was impossible. And they accused her of helping him without proof. They repeatedly said that to her. You saw she was tired. She'd been arrested in the middle of the night. She was cold. She had a blanket wrapped around her during the questioning. But they told her that Michelle didn't know the real Fotis. They knew things about him that she did not, and that he used her. They told her she needed to tell them multiple times where Jennifer was. They threatened her. They scared her. They lied to her. All permitted under Connecticut law. They told her she was going to lose her daughter, her family, that if they found the body, she was going to get charged with accessory to murder. She kept saying she didn't know, a dozen times, maybe more, but they didn't let up. There's no evidence to suggest that Michelle, who had traveled the world, had competed nationally and internationally in sports, and suddenly wanted to be a full-time mom to an additional 5 children who had just lost their mom. She had her own family. She explained that to them. She had a large and loving family. She had her good relationship with her daughter. Even the police admit in those interrogations that she was on the phone and listening. There was family discussions going on with her mom, with her sisters, all while supposedly helping dispose of evidence of a murder. Michelle wasn't trying to replace anybody. She didn't want to be these children's mother. She loved these children. She liked these children. But that's a far cry from wanting to replace their mother. Yes, there was a toxic custody battle, but she thought things were working out in her favor. I'm going to talk about the timeline very briefly. You remember that Jacob Peitranker is the one who suggested to Fotis in Michelle's presence that he write a timeline. That's when she found out that he'd even been at Jennifer's house that previous Wednesday, a couple of days earlier. She was mad that he had lied to her about that. She was mad that he didn't tell her that he had been to that house. And she was angry because she thought everything was working out through the court process. But he was lying to her even about that. If you give any credit at all to Mr. Gumieni's revelation that Michelle made a disparaging comment about Jennifer about a month earlier, I remind you that this is a man who was given written immunity and he was given verbal immunity before that. He was a non-citizen, told that he could be deported. There is one takeaway, however, from what he said. If you'll recall, what he said was that when they were bringing wood up to the house, she was upset that her 12-year-old daughter's picture was being plastered all over the internet in connection with the disappearance of Jennifer Dulos. And what did she say? According to Mr. Gumieni, that when she shows up, I'm going to kill her. And you remember, Gumieni himself said that's what he thought too, that she was going to show up. So if she's already deceased, why would anybody say that? Why would Gumieni make that his response? Listen to the judge when he talks about Gumieni. There's a special instruction to be very careful before you consider the credibility of someone in his position. Both his timing and the circumstances of that statement 5 years later that it suddenly became a revelation should give you some hesitation. Why? We put on Detective Allegro last week. You remember what he said, that he's the one who suggested, is it possible to Pavel? He said, is it possible that Fotis used that kind of language in describing his wife? This is in the July 8-hour interview, if you recall. He used those exact words, effing bitch, okay? Pavel said, nope, never heard that. But that would have been the time. But I remember Michelle Troconis saying something like that. That didn't even jog his memory about that. So I suggest to you that that part, the part about that he referred to her in derogatory terms, was made up after he got a signed immunity agreement to sort of ingratiate himself. Because remember, it's not just that he's been given immunity for his testimony. He's been given a get-out-of-jail pass for anything that he may have done in connection with hiding evidence. And he knew why he was taking the seats out of his car at Dulos' request. Now, Michelle was overwhelmed. She was exhausted. She was in shock. She still talked to the police multiple times on June 2nd with her lawyer, on June 6th with her lawyer, and again on August 13th. She answered every one of their questions. Even when they accused her of lying, did she ever say, I'm out of here, I'm not answering any of her questions? No, she kept answering their questions. It got to the point where whatever they said, she started agreeing with them, whether it was true or not. I put one of the interview points up on the wall there so you can see the way it played out, right? This is not just that they want her to be honest with her. They're saying there's no way he could have been home through science. But we've already explained how that works with transfer of DNA, skin DNA, how much can easily be transferred from one person to another. And here is evidence of actual physical transfer of items barehanded between Fotis, his wife, and all of his children. When Michelle gave information that was not within their narrative, that the puzzle pieces did not fit, they kept accusing her of lying. They told her she was wrong. They told her Fotis Dulos had to be at 69 Wells Lane. But the state hasn't been able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he was down there, even now. They suggest he's there. They've thrown out this darkened figure on a bicycle riding along in the area. There's no connection to any of that to the disappearance or harm that likely occurred to Jennifer Dulos. And you remember, you also will have the report by Ms. Streeter, and we put it in. This is the part I already mentioned. She specifically described some of the things. I mean, she's talking about detail. She put every detail that she observed. That's her job. But it was about as exact, line by line, minute by minute of what happened in that house. And that easily explains why a small amount of DNA would be found nowhere other than on a faucet in the kitchen. You remember Kristen Medell, the DNA person, because she talked about how transferred DNA, they called it touch DNA, if you remember, occurs. And I submit that that's the reason, that's the more likely reason that that's the place where the DNA was found. Otherwise, what are we supposing here? That if it was photostills, he took off his gloves, touched the faucet, and then put his gloves back on, his now maybe bloody gloves back on, walked out the door so it wouldn't be anywhere else. That's what doesn't make sense. That's what's pure speculation on the part of the state. And it's also clear that photos can't be in two places at once. There's also the fact, what are we going to do about getting a body or an injured woman? What are they going to transport her on a bicycle? Remember, where they saw the red pickup truck was about 300 yards, if I recall the testimony. It's up to you, not my memory, from where they found the Suburban. On a busy road, Lapham Road, in front of, near the entrance to one of the biggest parks in this area, a public park on Memorial Day weekend on a nice day, that nobody would notice anything, that there are no other cameras from any school buses that use that route showing any transfer, or for that matter, showing that the Suburban is even parked there. That also doesn't make sense. Where do you get the cleaning up supplies? How do you carry all these things? How do you get them from one vehicle to another outside that park on a busy, double yellow laned road? Now, there's no evidence as to when Jennifer's Suburban ended up on Lapham Road. What you do have, and I put these up, this is exhibit CC and CCC, and you'll have these documents in paper form. But there was a question raised about whether or not that Bluetooth connection of the phone belonged to Jennifer Dulos, or maybe it was the kids, maybe it was Lauren Almeida. But at this time, at 2:56 p.m. in the afternoon, when that Bluetooth connected to her Suburban, they were long away in New York City. So we know it's not them. But we have more than that. We have the Stratford police research that shows, if you look to the right there, that there were two numbers associated with Jennifer, one being the 604 number and the other being the 499 number. And you will see that it's the number down at the bottom is that 5C number. It connects to the 499 number. You see, there was a MAC, I think they called it, the MAC number. If you look at number 2 on the right, the unique number is the same as the unique number on the left there at 2:56 p.m. There's also the report, remember, by Mr. Knuth, the forensic guy from the lab, who talked about this as well in a letter to Detective Kimball. So they knew this all along. They just didn't pursue that at all. Incidentally, in just response to something that the prosecution said, I'm not claiming that Jennifer went through the woods and got on a train. I'm suggesting that when they followed the scent, somebody followed the scent with a dog, and it ended at the train platform at Talmadge Hill Road, the Metro North. So they didn't follow up with that. Did you hear anything at all about checking the train schedule, or maybe looking at, cameras from the trains, whether somebody ran off that way after being in the presence of Jennifer? Now, Michelle did not push back when the police told her she was wrong. She asked them what they wanted her to say, and maybe she was wrong. Even when she wasn't, even when she was helping and trying to be truthful, they told her she was wrong if that didn't fit their narrative. And eventually, for example, the FedEx envelope, she told them she knew nothing about these license plates. They told her, that doesn't matter. They cut her off and said, we don't need to know. That's not important. Well, it wasn't important until what? Today, when you hear the state again talk about 2024, how important that was. They didn't even let her say what she wanted to say about that. Sometimes they were mistaken, sort of like the 30 stops when it was only 3. You heard Kimball admit that was a mistake. He admitted a few times in answering questions, especially by Mr. McGinnis, those were mistakes. But the difference is those mistakes were under oath. He swore to some of these things. He couldn't remember who told him that. He didn't have any documentation. But when he swears to something under oath, if a private person does that, they'd probably get arrested and charged with perjury or false statement. For him, it's just a mistake. For Michelle, if she makes a mistake or misspeaks, it's a crime. That's the distinction that they're trying to make here. Deception, could I just have a time? 20. Deception is an interrogation tactic in Connecticut, and you heard police are allowed to lie, they're allowed to deceive, but they're threatening, when they're threatening a person to go to prison, maybe for many, many years, she's going to lose her family, she's going to lose her child. If she keeps telling them certain information, if she sticks to what she's telling them, those tactics can take a toll on memory and what you're going to remember or say, whether it's the pressure or you've been fed enough information so it changes your perception. And I'm not going to go into detail. You heard from my two experts, Professor Loftus and Professor Marion. One was an expert on memory and how people retrieve and repeat memory. Remember, this is 9 days after May 24th. And for Michelle, it was just a mundane day. She did her routine. The only exception is she told them she picked up the phone. She told them that when it was in the office. She didn't have to tell them that. Why bring that up at all? Kent Mawhinney was there. You saw the video of him driving in and him driving out later. Why would she admit she's the one who picked up the phone for 16 seconds, bad connection, and she hung up? You also, and I want to just say one thing about Professor Loftus. The prosecution suggested by naming a bunch of other cases that she was involved in that somehow she's connected to the defendants on those cases, that you should tar her with the people those lawyers represent, rather than that it was about science and what people remember and don't remember. You know, that has nothing to do with how you should judge the facts in this case. Same thing with, I would say, about Professor Marion, the linguistics expert. She told you about things that maybe you don't know about if you're not bilingual or multilingual. One of those things is something called influency. And we talk about things like, you listen to parts of those videos, maybe the prosecution would have you think, well, you're stalling for time. But she said that's a typical response for somebody who only has mid-level proficiency. And when you're hammering at somebody, they're under stress. They confuse tenses. They speak in the present when they mean to speak in the past, because in English, the present tense is the easy default. That and in the infinitive are the easiest way to speak if you're not fully 100% proficient in a second language. And things like stress and certain concepts, throwing in Spanish words in the middle of your sentence, that's all signs that you're just not proficient enough. You're just not proficient enough to handle these questions, especially when people are throwing them at you from different directions. And remember what was said in a report, which you will have. Authority figures, you believe, I think it was Professor Loftus that said that. If authority figure tells you something, you're more apt to believe it, that maybe you're just wrong. So maybe she was just wrong, but maybe Fotis Duelis was there. That was his phone, not her phone. And they would have to prove to you, beyond a reasonable doubt, they couldn't even be there, because that's how they've charged us. She told them about her weekend. She told them about everything she did that Friday that she could remember. And keep in mind, we'll put up the, we'll get to it in a minute, but she told them about the socializing the night before. She told them that during that time, you'll remember, Fotis stepped out. He went and got steaks. And during that time he went out to get steaks, he had a conversation on the phone with Kent Mawhinney. You haven't heard a lot about Kent Mawhinney, other than he's been charged with conspiracy to commit murder in this case. But he seems to be like an afterthought here. He may be the and others that you'll see are in the criminal information, conspired with Fotis Duelis and others. But there's been no evidence about her involvement with Kent Mawhinney. So I suggest you can immediately discard that as something to consider in this case. But, you know, we're talking about the fact that Fotis and Pavel took the Tacoma down to 80 Mountain Spring Road the night before, right at the beginning of when Stefan Reich arrived with his wife to look at carpets and then to have dinner. But there's nothing that Michelle knew about that. She didn't know that Fotis had stopped at 80 Mountain Spring and or made a phone call to Kent Winnie when he stepped out to buy some more steaks. And she didn't know, there was nothing, in fact, to suggest that she knew that. On the early morning of May 24th, the thunderstorms, remember, Kimball said there were no thunderstorms, we checked. He finally admitted that there were that night, and you have that map showing the red, where it's all coming right down towards their house in Farmington. And that's why when her daughter called her right before 1 a.m., she went to her room and slept in that room that night because the daughter asked her to. You have seen also surveillance cameras from Eli Road, from Jefferson Crossing and Mountain Spring Road, that between the time that Michelle went upstairs to her daughter's room and you see the Tacoma leave 80 Mountain Spring at 5:30 in the morning, there's nobody traveling on those roads. There's no pedestrians, there's no bicyclists, there's no other car, nobody, not a taxi, nobody dropping somebody off. The state would have you think he must have been sneaking through people's backyards in the middle of the night. But remember, we were on top of a mountain. That's why we put in that drone video. You can see it's way, way up on the top of Avon Mountain, at the pinnacle of that mountain, with views, at least from their house, facing towards Harvey. You see 100 miles. The topography was why that video was shown to you. There's no evidence he was walking, running, riding a bike, or anything between the time of Thursday night and Friday morning. We do know somebody else was in New Canaan, and that was Pavel Gumieni. You'll have that Burla report, and you'll have the pictures that show that between 12:30 p.m. and 4:21 on the Plainville-Farmington line, he's nowhere to be seen. He's disappeared. He claimed he was there all day. But first of all, you'll remember what Mr. Newt said. That dot on the lower left-hand side means that the truck was parked behind the house. He had told you he always parks in the driveway, except that day. And I showed you the video from across the street. You don't see any vehicle at all. But Newt testified that the truck started up at 12:30 and then is not seen again till 4:21. Coincidentally, that's exactly in the middle of the time when the Bluetooth shows up and attaches to Jennifer Dulos' Suburban at 2:56 in the afternoon. Just enough time to travel the 80 miles up from New Canaan back to the Plainville area, which is right next to Farmington. Then you see him at the gas station. They put in the receipt to show he's getting gas and how many gallons he got that day. Another point. Why are we not seeing any pictures of a Raptor? They spent hours, they claim, looking for Tacomas, red trucks, Raptors. Is it, first of all, credible that there are no other red trucks that are seen on the Merritt Parkway in the entire hours that they're looking? Or did they just take a clip that said, this could be it, and we'll just put that into evidence to create a narrative that doesn't exist? No Raptors, no black Raptors at all. So how did Mr. Gumieni get, first of all, down to New Canaan or back? Where's the evidence that he didn't make a side trip? Talks about his Chinese restaurant that he went to. Can't remember where it is, what he ate, or even if he was alone. We talked about the car seats. He said he replaced these car seats. There's nothing wrong with these seats. He ripped it apart, he said. And you'll notice, especially the one on the right, that's foam rubber. If there was blood, as the prosecution just suggested, wouldn't it stain foam rubber? How do you get that out? How do you get blood out of foam rubber? Remember, it was just a small amount of DNA that was found. DNA, it could have been touch DNA. And remember, she had been in that car. Jennifer had ridden in that truck before on those seats. You also have the evidence of Pavel's phone. And you know that he searched during the month of May a whole bunch of other Toyota Tacomas. And he deleted all of his searches before the police got his phone. He deleted that he had been looking at flights to Poland. He deleted that he was looking up about the disappearance of Jennifer Dulos. And he deleted all of his search history and messages from Memorial Day weekend. Michelle didn't do any of those things. Michelle told the police, even when they insisted, when they told her that science proved that Fotis couldn't be home, that she did think he was there. She knew he had an appointment with Kent Mawhinney, and sure enough, Kent Mawhinney was there that morning. And she kept telling the police she thought he was there, and they told her they would walk out and charge her with accessory to murder. She continued to maintain that story. Fotis could have been there. Again, we don't represent Fotis, but he could have been there. The state must prove the contrary beyond a reasonable doubt. We do know from the time that Kent Mawhinney arrived just around 7:20 after Michelle left to bring her daughter to school. The timing is not a coincidence. Kent Mawhinney was there for a reason that morning, but it wasn't to practice law. He's charged with conspiracy too, but there's no evidence that he conspired with Michelle. Is he that other named co-conspirator with Fotis Dulos? There's no evidence. We don't know. And here's a different question for you to ponder. If Kent Mawhinney was a co-conspirator and he was there, why not have him pick up the phone? Or better yet, if Michelle was the co-conspirator, why have Mawhinney there in the first place? Why couldn't she be the one to pick up the phone? Why need Mawhinney there? What was his purpose? To direct her to pick up the phone? Same thing with Andreas Tutsiartis. Remember, you were just shown a translation created by the police and the prosecutors to show you about Andreas's messages. They were in Greek. They were not in Greek letters. They were not in English like you were just shown. Michelle doesn't speak Greek. And so then the question becomes, what person would then send 2 hours later a meme that you were shown again to remind you what it was, a jokey meme, if that person believed that this was all a setup so that Fotis could have an alibi while murdering his wife? And it wasn't just to him, it was to 2 other friends as well. Again, in Greek letters, not English. You also know what Michelle did that day. You heard from Hutch Haynes about his wife, Erin, forgetting her purse at the house. Was that part of a plan to forget her purse? You remember the state asked, well, is that when you were discussing the plan to murder Jennifer Dulos? And Mr. Haynes shockingly, well, what? But that's the way the question was asked of him, as if maybe he's part of this too. I submit there is absolutely no basis for any of that. It's as pure speculative that he had anything to do with it. The idea that his wife would leave a purse there just to create a reason for Michelle to be walking over there or driving over there the next morning to return it is as speculative as everything else that the state has presented. She had lunch with Fotis. She then went over to 80 Mountain Spring. You also have the Stop and Shop and going to Petu Shop and all that stuff. I put this up here because you can see there was a plan by Renia Menudis, the realtor. We wanted to show the house. We want to see it on Saturday. Can we arrange it? And he goes, sure. Now, why would he agree to let a house be shown to strangers on Saturday morning early if he's using that house as a staging ground for destroying of evidence? I don't know, getting rid of clothing, getting rid of a body, whatever the state is claiming is going on at 80 Mountain Spring Road. That makes no sense. It makes no sense at all. There are 4 trips that Michelle told the police she made going back and forth. The first time she brought the wrong kind of vacuum because it didn't have a central vacuuming system. So yeah, 4 or 5 minutes she goes back. She told them in the timeline she prepared for the lawyer, which you have, that she went back and forth. Why put that in if this is part of some nefarious scheme? Why list that? I realize I'm getting close to my time here, so I'm going to have to skip over some of this stuff. The police quizzed Michelle over and over again. These were things that it's a test she just couldn't pass. They insisted she lied. They had a big chart of what they said she had said on other occasions, and then tried to trick her when she said something that was different than what she had said months before. She told people that she had a fire in the fireplace, and Petu, if you remember, said she did that all the time. These are little clips from a motion-activated camera, and that's what you see. What was she burning in that fireplace? Firewood. Just like Gumieni said when he helped her bring wood up to the house. You also, if you looked at those videos, see how windy it is. It was very, very windy. Those trees are blowing all over the place, and you're on top of the mountain. So it is not unreasonable, even in May, to have a fire going in your fireplace. Now, if you go to the garbage bags on Albany Avenue, and you look at those, you also can speculate what could not have been burned. You could burn garbage bags, you can burn ponchos, you can burn cloth, you can even burn sponges. Why not do that? Those are the items that would be, quote, incriminating. Police had that house, Fort Jefferson, seized for over a week, that the evidence shows, and they found nothing. They went in there with cadaver dogs, other canines. They found no trace of any evidence that connected that house to the disappearance of Jennifer Doulos. Briefly, I'm just going to mention a few other items since I'm running out of time. There's the Tacoma key issue that was brought up. The key was sticking out of the side of the truck when everyone was leaving, and as soon as Fotis called her to bring it back, she brought it back to suggest, as the police have, that there was something nefarious or evil about it. Why didn't she just say she didn't have the key? Why not come back in the 7 minutes that she came back? When it comes to the issue of the gum, and I'm going to end with that, and with one other thing. I'm going to end, actually, there's the gum. You will see that she's wiping her hands. She's not picking something up. So when the police told that to Colangelo, they were giving him false information. And I just want to play, that's going to be the last thing. I'm going to play that clip from Colangelo.
So looks like we're at 2:20.
I don't know if it's very close, but I just don't think she, on this further back, on missions. I don't think she knows. No.
She very happy with Starbucks, so it's hard for her. Why? If I was going to go around the city with Richie Colangelo because we wanted to go on a mission to dump all of our trash over the city, I would have met this. It would have just slipped my mind. We would do okay too. But yeah.
Unless she's legitimately on the phone, talking and texting, and she's not paying attention.
Right.
And then
she went outside the car. Yeah, she told me she knows.
She's outside.
She was open, her door was open, and she got outside and she had the car.
She dropped gum and she realized it was sticky and she
let it go.
I
Picked up the gum and she dropped.
that was one person in the world.
One person in the world who picks up gum. She never said that she picked up gum. Here's the state's attorney, the chief law enforcement officer for this judicial district, saying she doesn't know. Maybe she doesn't know, and you've got the 3 detectives telling him something that's false to get him to come off the notion that she doesn't go. And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, if he thought she didn't know, then that's reasonable doubt right there. This trial is a tragedy, no question about it. It is a tragedy for many people, including people that are sitting here in this audience, in this courtroom right now. But this case here is not about sympathy. It's not about antipathy and revenge. There is only speculation and no facts. We are all sitting here in hindsight, deciding what happened after the fact, what one should have known versus did know. What we can do when Michelle, for example,
you've got 1 minute.
Thank you. When Michelle picked up Fotis from the car wash, she didn't go in there. She had nothing to do with what Fotis Doulos planned to do with that vehicle on that occasion. Now, I don't get another opportunity. You may think that the state has a second bite of the apple. That's not fair, but it's important for you to understand the reason for this is they have the burden of proof on everything. We don't. So they do get to speak last, but I want you just to remember that they have a burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt for each element of each of the crimes the judge is going to read to you. And I ask that you reach the correct verdict, which is not guilty. Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.